Hello, Floodgate family, and welcome to this next edition of MedTech Emerging Minds. And I'm absolutely ecstatic to have an industry thought leader, Atul Deshpande, who's the CEO of Immediate Therapeutics, here with us today. Thank you so much for joining us on MedTech Emerging Minds.
Thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great. So I've gotten the opportunity, we've had a chance to chat and be together and understand what you're doing in your background. But for the audience, could you share a little bit about your background and history and what got you here to Immediate Therapeutics?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am actually a neuroscientist by training. I did my bachelor's in microbiology and biotechnology, and then a master's in neuroscience, both of them back in India. Got really excited about neuroscience, so came to University of California at Irvine, did my PhD there, primarily focused on Alzheimer's disease and Down syndrome. Then did a short postdoc at UCLA before realizing that I enjoy the business aspects of life sciences and research a lot more than the actual bench work. So decided to move into consulting. Did consulting for a couple of years. Eventually moved to London to get my MBA from Cranfield University, and then came back into consulting. Was out of New York for another couple of years before. Got reconnected with Sanofi and decided to move from New York to Shanghai for about 3 years to run the Asia Pacific R&D strategy for Sanofi. So I had Japan, China, Australia, some of the Southeast Asia, India, Russia, all under my purview of trying to bring in the right drugs for those markets, to make sure we are able to address patient needs. So spent about 3 years in Shanghai, had a fabulous time, learning about the emerging markets, the way the market works. The thinking is a little bit different than what we typically think in the Western world. So did that, and then eventually came back to Bridgewater with Sanofi as the operations lead for the immunology portfolio. As I was going through that, had an opportunity to work on business development, licensing, and then as it happened, had a chance to work as a global project lead for an asset called Dupilumab at that point in time. That asset turned into Dupixent.
Okay.
And as the asset was going through maturing from the clinical trials towards commercialization, decided to join the commercial team as the global operations lead for Dupixent.
Oh, wow.
That took me from Bridgewater, New Jersey, up to Boston. I was responsible for all the operations involved for the launch of Dupixent, both in the US as well as outside of US. I ended up launching Dupixent for atopic dermatitis, which was the primary indication, the first indication that we went out with, in about 52 countries. And the follow-on indication, we ended up launching in the US. I prepared Europe for it and other markets, and then eventually had to call it a pause as it started getting extremely busy with 2 big indications out of the door, but then also a whole product in a portfolio in a product approach that we had taken with Dupixent. The launch was amazingly successful. So as my friend up in Boston keeps on teasing me all the time whenever we are teaching, for all those billboards and advertisements that you see up in Boston, I'm partly responsible for it along with the other teams. But it was a fun experience launching Dupixent. With atopic dermatitis, it was a fabulous story because it was the first therapy that was brought to patients. And it was a market that did not exist. We created and shaped the market.
Right.
And with asthma, we were 5th to market with 4 other drugs already in the marketplace. But given the profile of Dupixent and the way the drug worked, the safety profile and everything, it was very quickly able to not just grow the market, but also capture the market share from some of the competitors that were out there.
Yeah, that's a great success story. And then you moved on to Harbor after that?
Correct. So a friend of mine had started this company, Harbor Biomed, out of Shanghai, also had an office in Boston. And so, just talking to him, he was like, oh, it would be fantastic to have your experience come match with what we're trying to build with Harbor Biomed. So I decided to join them in 2019. And when I joined them, it was a platform company with the portfolio slowly and steadily starting to build up. We put a lot more emphasis on building the portfolio beyond the platform. So, going through clinical trials and everything else. And in 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, we were actually able to raise about $180 million from venture capital in 2 different rounds, and then another $220 million from taking the company public in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange.
Interesting. Huh. That's really interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, love to juxtapose a little bit of your experience of moving from Sanofi, Dupixent, I mean, as big as, the pharma as you get, to smaller Harborview and bringing in fundraising. Right. Tell me a little difference in the skill sets between in that small emerging biotech versus, large pharma.
Right. With the large pharma, obviously, you have thousands of hands at your disposal to get things done. Mm-hmm. Whereas with a biotech company, especially when you're, when the team is smaller and things like that, I joined them as a chief strategist, but I was doing business development. I was doing, running the operations for US and Europe and so on and so forth. So you're wearing multiple hats under a single title, if you will, right. and doing a lot of things. I mean, there were, times that I, used to go back to Shanghai because all of the remaining management team was based out of Shanghai, except for me. I was based out of Boston. And so I would have these trips, to make sure that the whole team is on board with the portfolio that we were designing, the emphasis where we want to spend the money and how we want to spend it, and so on and so forth. And I remember there were even a couple of trips that were literally 2-day trips because we had major decisions to be made. And you're like flying in on, leaving on Saturday, getting there Sunday evening, having your meetings Monday and Tuesday, flying out on Tuesday because you have other, investor meetings or other things lined up here in Boston. So yeah, those get extremely intense. Yeah, but it also gives you the pleasure of trying to make the difference and it being in your control, rather than going up and down the value chain, which is typical for a big pharma. Right. So here you are, everything starts and ends with you as the management team. And whereas in big pharma, you're, just part of the puzzle, and someone, has to go all the way to the XCOM or CEO or whatever, and then it has to come down, takes its own time, all the bureaucracy that is involved with it. Whereas here, you're like, okay, this is the case. 5 of us sitting in the room, this is what we are going to do, done, move on. Yeah, no, that's interesting. I think you bring up some good points is, be willing to there is no, that's not my job comment, right, in a biotech startup, right? It Correct. Is, if it needs to be done, you've got to do it. And there's an intensity to it as well, because there's a speed and market and funding's limited. So if you got to get on that flight, that's what you got to do. 40 hours, you got to do it. But that's really interesting, being prepared for those changes. Right. To say, and when you're moving from a big pharma to, a smaller biotech or even a mid-sized biotech, this is something that you kind of, should be prepared for. Yeah. Is taking on whatever comes your way. It's not my job, it's someone else's. It is whatever the team needs to get done, yeah, to address what needs to, to be achieved. Yeah. And you get the idea that you can control it and there's impact to be made, not just part of the value chain. Absolutely. Yeah, love that. I'm going to be asking a few more questions of Atul, but if you guys have questions here, please post them below. We're going to be taking a few questions at the end. Now, I want to dive into what you're doing now. I mean, incredible background that gets you here. So diverse and, understanding the U.S. market, the big go-to-market, going public in Hong Kong. But now with Immediate Therapeutics, tell me a little bit about the need, the problem in the market that Immediate's solving. Right. So Immediate Therapeutics was actually started in 2020 by my chief science officer, who's Harry Selker, who is also the Dean of Translational Medicine up at Tufts Medical University. Okay. And the premise of Immediate Therapeutics is when you think about, ischemic emergencies, something like cardiac arrest. Typically, what happens in today's world is, imagine, the two of us are sitting here and just having a conversation. If I start having symptoms of an oncoming heart attack, which is sweating or chest pain or dizziness or things like that, for me as an individual, I'm probably going to ignore those symptoms for the next 30, 45 minutes. Yeah. Maybe finish this conversation and then I'll think about it. Or it'll get better, it'll pass. Or it will pass. Or even after the conversation's over, let me try something, that's available at home, and figure out whether that addresses, whatever is happening. Once that happens, if the pain doesn't go away, you typically then go on to call 911, or decide, if the hospital is close by, decide to drive to the hospital yourself. Once you get there, they're going to, get you admitted. If the ambulance comes here, they're going to look at your ECG, figure out, oh, this is, symptomatic of an oncoming heart attack, put you in the ambulance, hook you up with saline and give you an aspirin, and then drive you back to the closest hospital that can address the problem. So if it's an urgent care that is not going to be able to address the problem, they're not going to take you to urgent care. They're going to take you to a proper hospital which can address what's happening. By the time you get to the hospital, whether it's through the ambulance or the emergency department, they're going to then do your blood draws and everything else. Look for troponin, which is one of the biomarker for cardiac arrest. Once that is done, you go into imaging, and to figure out where the clot is and things like that. Once you figure that out, then you get to therapy, which is going to be either your PCI or stents or bypass. So from the time that I started this conversation of telling you what happens to the time that we talked about treatment, it was about 3 to 4 minutes. In real life, that is translated into 3 to 4 hours from the time of onset of symptoms to the treatment. And so what we are trying to do is change that paradigm of taking the patient to the treatment to bringing the treatment to the patient with immediate therapeutics. And so what we have in our hand is trying to address that unmet need of waiting for that long period when the damage to the heart is actually happening because it's not receiving the blood and the energy and the oxygen that it needs to survive and keep on operating the way it needs to functioning at that point in time. So with immediate, what we have in our hands is basically an asset that is a combination of 3 very simple things. It's glucose, potassium, and insulin. And it's mixed in a specific ratio so that it can act in the body and do what it needs to do. The way the drug combination works is fascinating. Glucose, as you can imagine, is what the heart muscle needs in order to survive because it's giving it energy. Potassium is what the heart muscle uses in order to communicate with itself. And so potassium in this case acts as an antiarrhythmic. So to explain it better, what happens is your heart obviously beats in a specific rhythm. And if the muscles are not able to communicate to each other, they're going to start losing that rhythm. And that pumping of the blood is going to start dropping, which could then eventually lead to heart failure. So being available at the concentrations that the heart muscle needs, potassium allows the heart to keep on beating in the same rhythm that it needs to. The last component of this is extremely interesting, is insulin. So all 3 components are given at supraphysiological level, which means extremely high concentrations. So that even when you give aspirin and saline, with the small amount of blood flow that is still reaching the heart, the concentrations are so high that it's enough for the heart to keep on functioning the way it needs to. In this case, when insulin reaches the heart, at the concentrations that we give, it activates what is known as the AKT pathway. It's an anti-apoptotic pathway. So which means that insulin reaching there tells the heart, dude, it's okay, I'm here, don't worry, I'm going to take care of the situation. And the next part it does is also even more interesting. It also acts as an anti-inflammatory.
Oh, really?
So when cells are dying in the heart, the inflammatory system is going to get activated to come and clean up because you don't want dying cells just sitting there. So the inflammatory system is going to come in, start cleaning up. Once it starts doing that, there are other molecules, cytokines, that are released in the system that are going to lead to more inflammation. And so insulin sits there, tells the heart, dude, it's okay, I got it under control, tells the inflammatory system, do not attack, do not get super activated, I got it under control. And so when you do that as a combination, that is what leads to a significant cardioprotective effect of this combination. And so we have done a phase 2 clinical trial where this was done 871 patients across 13 different sites in the US. And it included, only ambulance setting. So we did not look at ED, but mostly in the ambulance. And patients that received IMT 358 as the combination, we saw a 50% reduction in cardiac arrest and a 50% reduction in mortality.
50.
50.
Wow, that is highly impactful.
That is extremely impactful.
And it's just so interesting how those three elements can play together so well. I mean, it's got the energy they need, the ability to stay communicative so that rhythm stays in place, and then be able to ignite that really response that reduces the inflammation.
Correct.
And all those other cascading factors that will damage the muscle. And sometimes even when they recover from a heart attack, right, under the standard 4 to 5 hour treatment,
right,
they now have a damaged heart, right?
Correct.
The muscles, and something they have to live with and monitor, and will hurt their quality of life long term.
This is a fantastic point that you bring up, Joe, because one of the other things that we looked at as a result of this treatment was infarct size. Infarct size is basically the amount of muscle damage that you see in the heart, right? And this was done by imaging, and there's standard protocols to look at it. But what we saw was when you give it within that time window, the golden hour, as you want to call it, of 1 to 3 hours, we were able to show a 80% reduction in infarct size, 80.
Wow.
So imagine you reaching the hospital
right.
with a 30% infarct size because you did not get IMT 358 versus someone getting IMT 358 and reaching the hospital with a 5% infarct size.
Wow.
That is going to be game changing.
Yeah, a 5% damage to the muscle is probably imperceptible. A 30%, you're changing quality of life.
You're changing dramatically your quality of life because now you can't lift weights, you can't do strenuous activities, you probably don't have that much of energy to spend time with your kids or grandkids or others. That has a significant impact on the quality of life.
That's incredible. Well, I'm going to continue to ask some questions, but you have some questions about this or other things for Atul, please post them below. We'll pull that in. Now, I am curious on the regulatory pathway. You've got FDA breakthrough designation.
Correct.
And so tell us a little bit about achieving that, the impact of that, and what your next steps look like on pathway to approval.
Right. So with the regulatory pathway, this was a very interesting conversation that we went back and forth with the FDA. Initially, the phase 2 trial that I talked about, Immediate 1, was designed as a 15,000 patient trial.
Wow.
We were fortunate enough to get this as funding from the government to a tune of about $40 million from the NIH. And, the trial, as a conversation with the NIH and the regulatory authorities, was narrowed down to just the ambulance setting to a tune of, 871 patients. So we reduced the trial size just to be able to make it and show the impact that it can have on the patients. The second part of it was, the initial endpoints that were designed for the Immediate 1 trial was progression to AMI, so progression to myocardial infarction. Those cannot be studied in an ambulance setting. You need to study them in the hospital. So we then focused on our secondary endpoint, which is cardiac arrest, mortality, and infarct size. And so once we had those results, which I mentioned before, we went back to the FDA requesting to continue to a phase 3 clinical trial. Typically, when you do not meet your primary endpoint, the FDA does not engage with you. They want you to go back and look at, other things or redo the trial or stop the clinical development.
Yeah.
In our case, we were fortunate enough that the FDA looked at the data and said, wow, this is really impactful.
Yeah.
Right. And so not only did we continue the conversation with the FDA, we actually were able to engage with the FDA and co-develop the trial design for the phase 3 clinical trial.
Wow.
So now the phase 3 that we're going to do is a singular phase 3. Instead of 2 pivotal trials, it's going to be 1 single phase 3 study. And because the delta in our phase 2 was so big between the placebo and the treatment arm, it's only going to be a 1,600 patient trial.
Wow. Huh.
All of this falls under a special protocol assessment from the FDA called a SPA. Very few drugs have received a SPA from the FDA because there's always those safety concerns and other things that the FDA has. And in our case, thankfully, again, there were other studies that were done with this combination in Europe and some of the other parts of the world where we have safety data from over 22,000 patients. And the efficacy data from our trial, which talks about starting the treatment as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
So now under the FDA's SPA, it's going to be a singular clinical trial, a phase 3 pivotal with 1,600 patients. What we were able to further request the FDA was basically, look, I mean, we have the 871 patient data. If we do an interim readout on the next phase of clinical trial with 900 patients as an interim read, and if it meets the same expectation of 50% reduction in cardiac arrest and mortality, it would not make sense to continue giving patients placebo when you have such a big impact on the patients.
Right. Yeah.
And so through that, engagement with the FDA and conversation with the FDA, we were able to work with them a path forward that says if we meet the same standards of 50% reduction in the phase 3 clinical trial, we'll get full approval to get to the market and we'll stop the trial.
Oh, wow. That's pretty powerful. Now,
Right.
a lot of times, that might be associated with NTAP to help the reimbursement. Would you expect that to be part of that conversation as well at that phase?
It potentially could be. It potentially could go in that direction in terms of a conversation. But then also, in terms of bringing this drug to market, the commercialization pathway would be, through your insurance companies as well. You don't have to work with.
They're paying the long-term cost of this patient.
Exactly.
They might want to support it, and there's going to be a good pathway with, CMS, and, there's a positive outcome story, obviously, when you're getting that level of therapy, that level of impact for those patients.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So in addition to the SPA, as you mentioned before, we also have breakthrough designation from the FDA, which means, it's going to be, continuous submission of documents as much as we can, an open collaboration, an open conversation with the FDA, which we have been for the last several years now, and then also a 6-month review period instead of a 1-year review period for this combination.
Awesome.
Given that, this is a co-developed trial design, we actually just have to take the numbers back to the FDA at the end of the trial, rather than discussing what endpoints or what the timing of administration and timing of outcome and things like that. It's all has been decided, agreed upon, and it's just about the numbers as we finish the trial.
That's excellent. So right now, the fundraising stage to be able to support that trial. Where do you see, immediate in, let's say 5 years time? Where do you see the impact this could have, post approval, post, phase 3 pivotal?
Right.
Where do you see this?
We think, this would have a significant impact on the quality of life of patients, right? Because having this as your standard of care of anyone who's complaining about chest pain and getting these patients started, you can get to the hospital with a much smaller infarct size. Your therapeutic window is going to be much bigger as compared to, what you typically have on your standard of care. I think it's time to, start thinking differently about standard of care, above and beyond the saline and aspirin that we give to patients.
Yeah.
There's a better solution that's available. We are working extremely hard in terms of bringing this to market. The other thing that is going to happen as we get to continue to develop on IMT-358 is expansion and building a portfolio in a product. The same approach that we had taken for Dupixent. So when you think about the mechanism of action that we talked about, the way the drug works, the impact that it has on the heart, we're thinking about potentially expanding into other conditions.
Yeah.
So think about high-risk surgeries.
Right. Yeah. Post-operative, whenever you're having that level of damage. Right?
Whenever you're having that level of damage, I mean, you come from the orthopedic world, Joe, and knee replacements, hip replacements, these are all considered high-risk surgeries. Liver transplants, other things. These patients tend to have, some part of them have cardiometabolic effect post-surgery. And so the idea there would be to get these patients started before the surgery, through the surgery, and post-surgery on IMT-358, protecting the heart as you're going through the stressful situation of a major surgery.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, that standard of care and aspirin and saline, take aspirin and a glass of water has been around, for decades.
Right.
And so now really this is an opportunity to take that really to the next level, to a new therapeutic standard.
Right.
Whenever there's that damn shot. That's a really impressive. I'm going to take a step back for a moment.
Sure.
Away from immediate. And I want to pick your brain on really biotech startup.
Okay.
Right. And, other people might be are leading, startups in this life science space. What would you say are one of the biggest mistakes a life science leader can make in a startup environment?
I think one of the biggest mistakes in a startup environment is believing that you can do it all yourself.
Yeah.
We have fantastic people. Just taking the example of of Immediate, like I said, the founder is dean of translational medicine up at Tufts Medical. We have my CMO, chief medical officer, is Jim Udelson, who's the chief of cardiology at Tufts Medical. All of these guys bring in different set of experiences, but when they did Immediate One, they figured on the business side of things, they have no idea how to bring this to market, which is where I was able to come in and play a role in terms of the Immediate story.
Right.
And so now, even as I'm working on this, having that experience of bringing and launching a drug like Dupixent to market, I know what it takes in order to convert a startup into a potentially commercial company.
Right.
And so now I'm pulling strings on the people that I've previously worked with, that I know, brought in a lot of expertise on my scientific advisory board of people who know how to, write guidelines, people who know what's important for ambulance companies and, what they are looking for from a paramedics perspective. So understanding each part of the puzzle becomes important, and there's no way you or a couple of people in the company can do it. You need to reach out. You need to have the right network of people to be able to advise you, to guide you, to come work with you in order to make that startup successful.
Yeah.
The other side of the startup story is you can have fantastic science, but if you don't have the investor support that you're going to need, that science is not going to go too far. One of the things that I learned early on in my experience was you can have a fantastic molecule that you say is going to change, how you treat cancer or how you treat, orthopedic surgeries or heart attacks. But if you don't really have the buy-in from peers, then that's another part of the story. And there have been several molecules in our history that have gotten the approval from the FDA, but the payers have pretty much refused to pay the price that the companies are asking for. And so coming to Immediate again, reviewing through that experience, is when I came to Immediate, the first question that I asked was, fantastic on the clinical side, the data looks amazing, who's going to pay for it and how much?
Right. Yeah.
Right. So given US is a very different market in itself, you're looking at addressing not just the patient, but we actually have three different masters, if you will. We have the patient, we have the physician, and we have the payers.
Right.
And so you need to satisfy all three of them. And in this case, your customer is not your consumer, is not your payer. Right. So making sure that you really understand what that reimbursement pathway looks like and how can you quickly get your buyer, your payers to buy into what you're doing also becomes extremely important, because you can have fantastic science, but if you're not willing to pay for it, the drug's not going to get it to market.
I think those are two really good suggestions I hear you say. Is one, don't try to do it all yourself. But along with that, I think what was interesting is you really identified the need is to review what the team has.
Correct.
And what it doesn't.
Right.
And what it doesn't is to go out and find those people.
Right.
And to make sure that as you're reviewing your team, that you have the individuals that have the expertise that's going to get you there. Correct. And don't assume that you can figure it out on your own. Ask people, ask for help, reach out, identify those, use your network to be able to find that. I think that's a great suggestion. And I think the second suggestion I heard you say is, especially, and I think I've heard this from a couple of the interviews I've had, especially in the incubators, is you'll have either scientific founders or physician founders who are so focused on the impact and the patient outcome and the unmet need.
Right.
They forget to ask the question, who's going to pay for it?
Correct.
And if you don't have, medicine's a business like any other.
Right.
And if there's, you got to follow the money.
Yep.
At the end of the day to find the success. So I love those two really good suggestions there. That's really powerful. I'm going to take a moment, see if we got any questions. If they have any questions coming from the audience, please post them below and we'll pull those questions in. Now, one other experience I want to tease into a little bit too is as companies are looking on the U.S. market focus, the global market focus, and how do people need to assess that? And then what differences? You come from a really unique perspective, running APAC, going to public in Hong Kong. So what suggestions will you have for founders or startup leadership trying to determine and answer those questions?
Right. So the U.S. is today and still going to be for the next few decades the most important market for bringing a drug or a medical device into patient care. So understanding how the US market works and making sure that you have a product that addresses the unique needs from a patient, payer, and physician perspective is going to be important to succeed in the US market. But don't forget of the 7 billion people that are around in this world, just 330 million are in the US. There's a whole bigger population out there. And from bringing a drug to market perspective, Europe is 600 and something odd million patients, so double the size of the US in terms of patient population. There's 1.3 million in China, 1.4 billion people in India. So those markets are all lucrative markets depending on how you want to position your drug. So when we're thinking about Immediate Therapeutics and IMT-358, for example, obviously given the strong support that we have from the FDA with the SPA, the BTD, and then the BLA, which we'll talk in a minute, that is enough for me to carry that drug over to Europe, eventually to Middle East, down to Africa, to China, India, and Australia. So I can get all of this, thinking about and beyond. But there are some countries that are going to come back and say, wait a minute, you did your trial in the US. I need to know whether it works on my patient population. If it works in the same dosing that you're giving, if it works in the same speed with which the IV you set on, that works in my patient population. So there are nitty-gritties when you think about the global markets of what you need to do and what data you need to show. But you need to start thinking about those very early on. As soon as you're done with your phase 1, maybe phase 2, as soon as you're done with your phase 2, you need to have a strategy that outlines how are you going to sequence your launches in the global markets. And this was one of the important things. And you will again see in the news cycle, there's the talk of most favored nations, MFNs, and other things when it comes to pricing. And that is becoming an important issue now, where if you go to Japan to launch a drug, they used to look at what is the price in Germany or the US or the UK and take that as potentially a benchmark pricing, and some of the other countries would do the same thing. Now, if you have pricing pressures coming in the US from Medicare or even the local insurance companies, you will have to think about sequencing your launches. You'll have to think about, where do you carry out your clinical trials? What data is required for those local regulatory agencies? And then what data is required for reimbursement to happen in those countries? Yeah. And so sequencing becomes a significant issue under the new policies and pressures that you're also facing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's interesting the fact that you're talking about within your clinical trial, if you have a desire to go into certain markets and that is part of your roadmap plan, is there a way to integrate those patient populations into that trial? Because that's a question that's going to arise to be able to access that market.
Absolutely.
And if you can think about it ahead of time, you're going to be saving some time and probably a couple $millions, to be able to answer that question later on, as well as, that knock-on effect of the reimbursement. What are their reimbursement platforms going to ask? What are they going to need? So that's really good, interesting advice. You talked about a little bit about the BLA, about mentioning that. So give me a little more.
Yeah. So with IMT-358, like I said, it's a very simple combination of glucose, potassium, insulin. There's beauty in this simplicity, but then there's also challenges. There's no composition of matter IP when it comes to this specific ratio, because these are 3 very easily available ingredients. Of course, the USPTO is not going to give you a composition of matter IP. But what we were able to do, and this is where as you're thinking about startups, as you're thinking about bringing new technologies to market, you need to think about what your IP strategy is going to be. And when I say IP, I want to spell that out. It's going to be intellectual property strategy going to be, and how does it tie up with your business strategy and business priorities, right? And so when we typically think about IP, we get stuck into the traditional frame of mind of patents.
Mm-hmm.
But intellectual property goes way above and beyond patents. If you think about patents, when you have that initial idea, you file for a patent, you get 20 years of exclusivity in the marketplace of no one being able to replicate what you have, the technology that you have. When you look at drug development, you spend anywhere between 10 to 12 years of drug development. So by the time you bring something to market, you actually only have about 8 years remaining or 10 years remaining on the product that you have. And that's why you try to maximize the price, the value proposition, and everything that you want to bring in terms of returns. When you think about intellectual property itself, there's a lot of other ways of thinking about this. There's regulatory exclusivity, which can work in terms of intellectual property or protecting your asset. And one of the things that we did was we worked with the FDA to get a biologic license application designation for IMT-358. So now, because of the concentrations of insulin that we are using, the FDA recognized that this is beyond your hormone replacement that you do typically for diabetes, and this should be considered as a biologic. And what that does, it gives me 12 years of exclusivity in the US market.
Interesting.
So no one will be able to bring an application to the FDA with the same formulation to bring it to market for the next 12 years after my clinical trial is done.
That's interesting. Yeah, because you're really, it's not a unique molecule, to your point. It's not that compound can be patented, but that idea of having that's a biologic because it's used in such concentration, using that regulatory guidance to essentially create protection, the market protection, to allow the financing of the clinical trial, right?
Right. And then you also have to start thinking beyond the composition of matter IP, because you can get method of use IP, you can get process IPs, you can get manufacturing IPs, and those are the kind of moat that we have built around IMT-358. So we have patents pending right now around the timing of administration, patents pending right now under review for the way IMT-358 is going to be packaged, because insulin is a kind of sticky substance, so you can't just package it into a regular PVC bag, not into a regular saline bag. It needs specific inert substances that are coated inside the bags for it to be eluted out in the same ratio that you put it into the bag. If you mess up that, the patient's life could be in danger. Because now you're giving higher levels of glucose, lower levels of glucose, whatever it might be, it could jeopardize the treatment itself. So we have kind of built a moat around the asset itself in order to make sure that there's strong barriers for someone else to enter, going above and beyond your typical composition of matter patents.
Really interesting. Well, I tell you, you're really making a lot of impact. I love how you've used the experiences that you've had, from launching products to R&D, and have compounded up into Immediate Therapeutics. Now, someone listening that wants to get in touch with you, interested in investing, want to learn more, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, do visit our website. My email address is on the website, or find me on LinkedIn. Connect either way. Would be more than happy to walk you through the details, walk you through the value proposition. We are into fundraising right now, looking to fund this phase 3 clinical trial to take it to fruition. Interestingly enough, Joe, the timing of doing this could not be better. We're looking to close on a $50 million round and then get this to the patients as quickly as maybe in the next 2.5 to 3 years. Incredible. Given everything that we have from the FDA, the support that we have from the FDA, things should be speeding up very quickly once we close the round to get this through the clinical trials.
Yeah, and for the thousands of people that are having a heart attack today, that can't be soon enough.
It's actually millions of patients, because in the US, 7.5 million patients call 911 or reach the emergency department complaining about chest pain. About half of them are triaged. It might be anxiety or indigestion or whatever. The remaining half go through the process, and 1.2 million patients are confirmed of ACS every single year, with thousands, hundreds of thousands dying because of this, just in the US. We haven't even talked about the global scale of heart attacks, and heart attack still remains one of the biggest killers in the world. And those numbers will continue to grow, although they have slowed down. The biggest impact is where you have the infarct size and the quality of life differences. Post. So you may not die of a heart attack, but the impact that a 30% infarct size or a 20% infarct size is going to leave on the patient remains for the remainder of their life. And the burden of, all of this, the burden of disease, as we call it, on the society, with caretakers and, expenditures and rehabilitation and everything else, is huge.
That's incredible. Well, hey, thank you for all you're doing and all the good work Immediate Therapeutics. I know millions of people's life literally depend on it. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for sharing your story and the great work you've done. I know I've learned a ton, and I'm sure a lot of people as well have learned a lot from you. So thank you for coming and being part of MedTech Emerging Minds.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for hosting me.
Thank you.
Thank you.